the Hurling Show, brought to you in association with Torpy. Torpy are leading hurling into a new future with Bamboo, a revolutionary hurley created using their unique engineered hurling performance know-how. Already being used by many inter-county players, Torpy's Bamboo is highly sustainable, offers players greater striking distance and a more consistent balance every time, without compromising on natural feel. Check them out on the Torpy website and in the link below, and enter the promo code OurGame to get yourself 10% off. Yes, hello and welcome to the Hurling Show. Shall we reflect on the little image there that we have? The Love Island twist on it. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that before I just started right now, Mike Verney. What do you make of that?
No, that's the first I've seen of it. Your physical shape is questionable, but I'm delighted to see that at least I am the one that has the six-pack. You just look like you're absolutely jacked up on whey protein.
Will you go? I'm absolutely ripped as ever. So I'm Jake, you're Brad there. I'm sure you were watching Love Island.
Brad. Yeah. Could you get a more American name than Brad or Chad or Chad?
He's from Newcastle, isn't it?
Right, he must have a bit of American blood in him somewhere.
Yeah, a pure ape anyway, actually, is one thing for sure. Just a reminder, we're brought to you by Torpy and the Bamboo Stick. Get 10% off with the promo code OurGame. Also, if you want to get this on audio podcast, join the OurGame Supporters Club on Patreon, a $5 a month, patreon.com/OurGame, and support the channel there. So, Michael Verney, massive all weekend coming. I mean, this is a huge amount of the hurling season itself is going to be done by the end of this season. Just to run through what's coming: Clare against Wexford, Laois against Waterford, Dublin, Kilkenny, Kerry, Westmeath in the Joe McDonagh Final, Kildare, Meath, Roscommon, Sligo in the Christie Ring, obviously Tip Limerick in the Munster Final. So there's a couple of more games in there as well, which we'll get to. But God, it's some feast of hurling.
Yeah, it's definitely quantity over quality this weekend as well, Shane. It's like everywhere you look, it's wall to wall, like really top class games. And as I said to you about the qualifiers, it's really only starting now. Knockout hurling is only starting now. Even in the provincial finals, they have a back door. Obviously, there's the big carrot of silverware, but they have a back door there to go through. This is the first weekend where, apart from last weekend, I suppose, where Antrim were knocked out, a big hitters are going to fall this weekend, be it Wexford or Clare, or be it Waterford or Laois. So it's massively interesting. That's before you even talk about the silverware on offer, and two real intriguing provincial finals as well. Lots of different kind of angles to look at. I know you're definitely not the most optimistic tip man. Part of me thinks there's a lot. It's just like you're building up to this massive tip performance. Part of me thinks that. And you'd imagine they are, because they're coming in very, very low key this time around. Like, I haven't heard anybody really, give Tip an overwhelming chance or anything going into this weekend. So, if anything, that means maybe there could be a performance brewing. But yeah, some huge games, huge games.
Yeah, and I'd love to know, what do people think in terms of the Munster Final, any of the games, Leinster Final? How can Tipperary make this game a little bit more competitive than the last few times? Where can they get little wins? That's what we want to talk about, and we'll definitely come to that. Also, we already have a couple of comments in. Jimmy Juice's bar, straight in, a boy Verney, obviously slating me. Joe LK20, the draw didn't make any sense. Clare beating Waterford made no difference to their progression. Wexford should also have benefited from beating Laois. I mean, that's true for Waterford this weekend. Beaten in the first round by Clare, and they're now far more likely to get to the next round than Clare. Clare may beat Wexford, but obviously it's a much easier proposition for Waterford to beat Laois, and that's no disrespect to Laois.
The system doesn't work sometimes. Like, sure it doesn't. Like, they got to a provincial quarter or provincial semi-final, whereas Waterford were beaten in the provincial quarter final. So it doesn't make sense that they should be, punished in some regard. Whereas Waterford are getting a much, like, after this weekend, there's a strong chance that Waterford will be in the next round and Clare won't, despite the fact Clare beat Waterford already in the championship, which makes no sense.
Yeah, bring back the round robin as far as I'm concerned. Can't get it back soon enough. And as I kind of said to you before, I'd love the round robin, Leinster and Munster, and then, play a Leinster and a Munster final, and then merge the table together. And let's say, like, Kilkenny have played all the Leinster teams in the first part of it, then the second part, they have to play all the Munster teams, and obviously, so everyone plays everybody in that championship, and then you have an overall table because they merge together. I think that would be brilliant.
How many games are we talking there? So you're looking at what? You're looking at 9 games?
Every team would have nine games or 10 games each if you're going to have 11 in, 6 and 5 in the two provinces. So it just depends on how. But that would be a nice way to sort of maybe nudge the league out of the way or condense the league a little bit more. Every game would matter. And the amount of players you'd have to lose, or use, I should say, would be brilliant.
Just on that, sorry, I'd like to tease that a bit more. Are you talking about top 4 in semi-finals then? Or how many would drop out?
Okay, so the way I like it, at the moment, we've got the point system. I think it's two points for a win and 1 for a draw, isn't it? Okay, so let's say you finish top of your group. You've obviously got the most points, and you also have a provincial final. So that if you win your provincial final, you get an extra 2 points or something like that. Anyway, the teams merge together. So then you'll have whoever won the provinces, they'll obviously be up at the top, and then every other team will be chasing. So let's say we went with 10 teams. I would say the top 2 get to All-Ireland semi-finals, and it will actually be a benefit to have that week of a break because you'll have had so many games, a bit like in the NFL. So number 3 to 6, they'd be in a quarter-final, and then the rest of the teams would play a relegation. So the whole way throughout the season, you're pretty much playing for something. I think that would be brilliant.
And you've still kept the provinces because Leinster and Munster mean something in hurling, whereas in football, they probably don't. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think the big thing there, Shane, is that to merge league and championship. When you were talking there, I was like, geez, thinking, when are we going to play any club games in the middle of this? But if the two of them are merged, you're looking at, could you play that off over a nice maybe 4 months, even something like that?
Well, I think so. I don't see any reason why not. So if every team was playing 10 games and then you had a knockout 3 or 4 rounds of that, 14 games, could you play that over the space of 5 months anyway? You'd have to get rid of the league, maybe play a pre-season competition if you like, or a very condensed league. I think it's doable, and people out there, let us know what you think.
League still means something, provinces still mean something, and obviously you have to be within the top 6 to be in with a shout for the All-Ireland quarterfinals. Has the Saint solved the fixture crisis?
Yeah, well, I made this suggestion to you a couple of years ago, so you weren't listening.
Don't remember hearing that. That was him on air after the other, definitely.
You noticed that Buff Egan put out a great old tweet, or on his different social media channels, about who are Brian Cody's top 3 players of his managerial career. That's something we want to throw out to the viewers there as well. We'll try and come to a resolution on it by the end of it. Well, we'll pick our own top 3 players each. But that is a tough one. Straight away, I just went, whoa, like Tommy Walsh there, Henry Shefflin. I think even Michael Fennelly was big. TJ Reid obviously has carried the team in the last few years. JJ Delaney, God almighty. Eddie Brennan, sure, I can't not mention him.
It's a huge question. Huge question. The way I put it to you, Shane, is this. Would Brian Cody still be the Kilkenny manager now if he didn't have TJ Reid over the past 5 or 6 years?
Oh.
That's what I put back at you, because during the lean years, and these are obviously the leanest years, even though they've had some silverware, he has carried them through the worst point. But we just go back to the 3 for a second. I think you'd be very hard pressed to leave Henry out. I do think you'd be very hard pressed to leave TJ out. As you said, Michael Fennelly at different stages was definitely their most important player. I would say, like, from probably 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, maybe, he was probably their most important player. They couldn't really do without him. Cody obviously had DJ at the start of his reign. You could say if DJ hadn't come back, they probably wouldn't have won the All-Ireland, or they maybe wouldn't have won the All-Ireland in 2002, and then he was obviously captain in 2003 as well. That's not putting Tommy Walsh, and probably by all accounts, the one player he asked not to retire or to come back, JJ Delaney as well. He would have to be in the mix too.
This is a ridiculously tough question. Buff, you've cursed us with this one. It's such a good one, but it's so difficult.
Very interesting to hear what different people think as well, because I think it's important to take in the different eras that Cody has had. The early years, here's one for you. Could he have done without Shefflin during that really good team of the noughties, when they had Owen Larkin to pick up the slack, Michael Fennelly to pick up the slack, Brennan to pick up the slack, Richie Power to pick up the slack? But could they do without TJ Reid now, or over the past 4 or 5 years? I genuinely don't think so.
Yeah, and I think the key to this also is don't just name 3 players. You got to have reasons with it. Shane Brophy of the Nina Guardian sports editor there, he's just after commenting saying, Henry Shefflin, 2010 injury showed how important he was. JJ Delaney, the best of that group of players. Michael Fennelly, midfield enforcer. But that's leaving out the likes of Tommy Walsh and Eddie.
TJ.
Yeah, a TJ, Jesus Christ.
The Shefflin one in 2010 is that's like Kilkenny would still point back to that as the main reason, one of the main reasons that they lost in 2010. So that's definitely a fair point. Interestingly said that JJ was the best of that group of players. Does he mean the best of the generation that he came through, including Shefflin, or I wouldn't mind a bit more on that?
Yeah, Shane, get to follow that up if you wouldn't mind. Please do. Joe Butler's after commenting, TJ Henry and DJ, or alternatively, Tommy, JJ and Michael Fennelly. Hey, we're going to need you to nail your colours to the mast there, Joe. It's a tough one, but you kind of have to go for it. Hey, just while people are getting their comments in on that, we have to talk about the scoreline in the Munster minor hurling quarter final. Cork 6-28, Clare 6 points. I mean, this is a very, very damning result for Clare hurling. And there's a number of reasons that this obviously didn't happen. They were missing players. My information is that they were missing their half-back line. They got rid of Fergal Lynch after the 2019 successful season. So something obviously happened there. There's obviously the issue with... There's obviously been lots of different issues there. They never appointed an under-16 manager for 2020, never ran an under-16 county championship in 2020. So there are many, many reasons, and people, get your comments in here. There are a lot of frustrated people in Clare hurling, no doubt about it, and rightly so. No Clare team should ever be losing by what was it for a finish? 6-28 to 6 points. I mean, it was a 40-point loss, was it?
Yeah, and nobody wants to see it, Shane. Like, you slag off Clare the odd time, and I slag off Clare about 95, and the crack we had in 98 and that. But like, I want to see Clare at the top table like forever. I don't ever want to see them going. No more than I tell you, a lot of hurling people never wanted to see Offaly disappearing from the top table, because you want as many teams as possible being competitive. And a result like this is not good for hurling in general, not good for Clare hurling obviously too. Now, there are some mitigating circumstances, but as you said, not having a management team last year, when you looked at like how much could you have lost during lockdown if you done nothing? Like, you could have regressed for years. Technically, a group could have had. So it kind of maybe looks like that's what has happened to this group of players, and you'd feel very. It's unfortunate for the players involved, because they're going to be tagged with this, and it's not their fault, and it's not the management team's fault. If anything, I think it was Seamus Chaplin who stepped up as manager of this team. I'd have to say fair play to him, because you're on an absolute hiding to nothing with that group having done nothing last year. So it was always going to be very, very difficult. As you said, they were missing players as well. The only thing I will say is, while you can regress very quickly at underage level, if you get your house in order, you can come back quite quickly too. So hopefully this will have... Were already alarm bells ringing, and I believe Tommy Guilfoyle was very good on Clare FM last night, talking about like who's actually in charge of Clare underage hurling, who is coordinating it all, because it seems from talking to people from within that there doesn't seem to be any one particular person or a group of people coordinating it. So hopefully they'll go and ask the tough questions that need to be asked now, because as I said, nobody wants to see this.
And then, if Mark Rogers plays this weekend for the seniors, I believe he's ruled out of Monday's Limerick against Clare match. And this is something John Kiley was asked about as well, if he played.
I think he's already ruled out, Shane. I think he came on late in one of the games. So
you might be right there.
Yeah, and Shane Meehan, I think, has a bit of an injury, so they're basically down two of their best players. That under 20 rule is absolutely farcical. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And even for the under 7, the way the minor rule has changed as well, even would catch a lot of rural clubs as well. Like, a lot of lads would have played their adult debut at 15 or 16. So you're essentially punishing the small clubs who need, more guys. You're punishing not smaller counties, but counties that don't have as big a pick. There's no reason why Mark Rogers can't play under 20 and senior. Absolutely no reason in the world.
Yeah,
especially that is Shane, take the Fitzgibbon out of the equation, and take like other. There's not much club going on at the moment. It's not. He won't be burnt out at the moment. Like, there's not enough going on for one to be burnt out.
Yeah, but if he plays 2 games in 3 days and he gets injured, then fingers will be pointed at the same time. So we know why it's excessive. It's definitely excessive, and it's going to punish Clare unduly. But there's probably some rhyme or reason to it. Just even looking at some of the comments from Clare people on Twitter last night, Niall O'Connor, some top class people in that management team, but they weren't going to work miracles, and unfortunately weren't on an even footing. Colin Ryan, former Clare hurler, feels sorry for minor players, and hopefully it won't scar them, but underage structure and S&C has been in decline for a while. Good people in schools and in county have tried to rectify recently, but poor minors were cannon fodder, which is horrible. Structure changed quickly. And Derek Lynch added that it's not the result of the group of players who put in a huge commitment and that there's systematic failure, and simply the status quo simply cannot be allowed to continue anymore. So there's a huge amount of frustration there, no doubt about it. Adrian McGrath, who is of course Clare man, this is the best system I've ever heard. April, May, June, July, done August, September, mid-October for clubs, November, December, provincial, and All-Ireland close season January. So he's obviously referring back to my provincial suggestion a little bit earlier.
It's done even earlier than he suggested, I'd say it's done April, May, June. I'd say it's over end of July, early August, I'd say. And that's only if you're still in the shake-up. And chances are 7, 8, 9 and 10 are probably know whether they're in or out from an early stage as well.
Yeah, and I mean, you can even incentivize it with home venue. If you finished 7th and 8th and you're in relegation, at least you know you're going to be against the 10th. If you're 7th, you're home against the 10th place team. So it gives you something to play for all the time. A couple of more comments are in. Shane Brophy has expanded on his point about his top three. Pound for pound, JJ Delaney was their best player, never exposed at either 3 or 7, kept the game simple. Donald Farrell has added in Owen Larkin, JJ Delaney, TJ Reid. TJ for the last 5 years, JJ because he said he was the best defender he ever saw, and Owen Larkin for consistency and pulling them through in the toughest games. That's a fair point. I don't think we'd even mentioned Owen Larkin. Oh, you did briefly actually, but that leaves out some big names again. Tommy Walsh hasn't been named just yet, I noticed.
Yeah, Tommy Walsh was so influential, and I suppose it was there was a highlight reel of things that he probably did. But for me, I would say that JJ is the best defender I've ever seen, and that's saying something because like my own probably clubman Brian Wheelaton is absolutely unbelievable. But for pure raw defensive skills, never really getting caught out, always doing the right thing, always doing the simple thing, and as Shane says, like rarely, if ever, being exposed. Yeah, JJ was absolutely supreme. Yeah.
Yeah, Brian White added about that Clare result. It was 2-9 to 5 at half time. Clare gave up in the second half and made the scoreline look better. It could scarcely look worse. And even if they did give up in the second half, maybe part of that is down to the fact that a different level of conditioning. You know, it could be something like that. Also,
I'm sure they didn't give up, but they could have been absolutely gassed by half time. Sometimes you put in an absolutely monumental effort and there's just nothing left. But the skewing of the scoring lines for to be 15 points to 5 at half time, and then there to be another 30 points added in the second half is it's hard to believe. But I hope alarm bells were already ringing. I hope there's sirens everywhere in Clare. And over the next couple of months, they just get their house in order.
Yeah, just to touch on some of the other results in the minor over the week. Wexford beat Kildare 2-18 to 3-10. So Kildare continuing to perform quite well, even in defeat there. Dublin beat Meath with an awful lot to spare, 14 to 1-6. And then Tipperary pulled away from Kerry eventually, 2-27 to 1-14. There's plenty of other comments coming in here as well. Kieran Stubbins, top 3 Kilkenny hurlers, Shefflin, 9 All-Stars and an all-time championship top scorer. Tommy Walsh, All-Star in defence, midfield and attack. JJ, arguably the greatest defender so far this century. Actually, as it happens, Joe Canning is more than likely going to take that championship top scorer very soon. Didn't happen for him against Dublin, but he might do it the next time out. Here's another a tough one for his dream hurling five-a-side. I don't think I have the mental power to take that one on today, but definitely that is one we should tackle soon. Luke Toomey, Shane Barrett and Alan Connolly out for the Cork under-20s next Tuesday versus Tip. A joke, to be honest. It is, especially when there's a couple of days of a break for, well, whatever Tipperary players might be involved, but for Cork, they're not even in the qualifiers this weekend. So,
Shane, I know what you're saying about like if someone gets injured, it's to play a game. You know,
I'm only playing devil's advocate. Yeah, I don't even agree with it.
Like me and you, like I remember when we used to play a game every Saturday and Sunday. You could play minor and under 21 Saturday. Remember we played a minor semi-final on Saturday and under 21 semi-final on the Sunday, and there wouldn't be a bother on you. Not a bother on you at all. You'd feel absolutely 100%. I'd love to feel like that now. I have the possibility of even doing that now. Lucky if you hurl a game a week now at the moment, the way things are now. But that doesn't knock a funk out of lads. And particularly as well, we were doing like the wrong strength and conditioning back in the day. They're doing everything that, like generally doing everything that they should be doing. They're doing all the preventative stuff as well. So if anything, they should be in a much better position to make sure that they're not burnt out. But I just think it's madness really. And it's Yeah, in general, you're only hurting the counties that will need these guys a bit more. The stronger counties will generally have loads of other guys that can step up, where maybe Clare don't have another Mark Rogers.
Yeah, well, actually, Adrian McGrath's after adding a little bit more on that Clare situation, saying the Mark Rogers situation is the other way around. If the seniors don't win, he is eligible to play. So if they continue to win, then he won't be eligible. Is what I'm taking from that. So that's a bit of a. Either way, it's not ideal for Clare. It's not ideal, and even for the player, he wants a bit of clarity. All players want that bit of clarity. But now we might as well jump into the qualifier this weekend. It's the first round. Clare against Wexford, Leinster against Waterford. Get your comments in and let us know what you think it is. One of the big questions we asked straight off the bat is the enmity between Davy, Fitz and Brian Lohan. Is it still interesting, or has it been flogged to death at this point?
Surely it's more interesting now than it's ever been before. So, like, if we talked about this, and we talked about this before the league fixture in 2020, and we talked about, you go back to that game in UL when LIT were 6-1 outside or something like that to beat UL in a Fitzgerald Cup match, and they came in through the bushes like Homer Simpson in that episode of The Simpsons where he kind of disappears through the bushes, and they were warming up on top of the UL boys, and there was all hooping and hawing during the game, and Tony Kelly got this unbelievable goal, and LIT caused this massive upset, and Lohan said that after that there was things that went on in that game that he just said were basically unforgivable, that he would never forgive, and Davy rang him and tried to meet him or something, I think, to try and iron it out, and Davy said that Lohan said something to him that day that he would never repeat. He said, obviously, because it was that bad. So that was grand. And then you're talking about guys that played 1 and 3 together throughout their Clare career, 2 All-Ireland medals. Clare only have 4 All-Irelands, and these 2 were fullback and goalkeeper for 2 of those. They should be brothers till they die, basically. And all of a sudden, there's this big rift between them. But then they start actually meeting on the sideline as inter-county managers. And, last year's championship match, and you had the abuse that was shouted at Davy from the stands. And then you had the big COVID gate story this year. You have all the crack in the background in Clare, and basically how some people would say that, people at board level are working against Brian Lohan, and then all of a sudden you have Davy's dad is obviously employed by the Clare County Board. Like, there's more going on in this rivalry than there's ever been going on before.
Yeah, it's not like we can say a whole pile knew about it, but it's still great to watch it. Like, I did an interview with Eddie Brennan earlier this week, and I'm going to play a clip in a little bit of time, but he said it's like all the subplots, like a Shakespearean play, also added in. He'll be getting the popcorn out for this one. I mean, look, there's no getting away from it. Davy is a competent figure. We've seen it happen with, like, Jason Ford on the pitch. We've seen it happen with, on sidelines with different managers. James McGarry was giving him lots of it. He was saying after the game against Kilkenny. Then there was obviously the Clare backroom person who did it last year in the qualifier. These things seem to keep happening. And the bottom line is that Davy's involved in a lot of these. I'm not saying he's always at fault, but he's a competent type of figure. He's very entertaining to watch. There's a lot to like about him and his teams. But he is involved in a lot of this stuff. And it's interesting to watch. It just is, like, because you feel like this could explode at any moment here. What is going to happen between these two on the sideline if there's a contested ball in between them and both of them are going blood and thunder forward saying, that's from my team? All of a sudden, things can spill over very quickly. It takes very little, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it does. I just, like, imagine if Netflix were working within the GA at the moment, like, once brothers, now sworn enemies. It's just like, and you have without being smart, you have a little small guy and you have a big domineering guy, and it's just everything. They're so kind of diametrically opposed. Davy is such an out there kind of a character and always has his feelings out there. Brian Lohan, like, you never know what he's thinking. You don't really. They're just very, very different figures. I think it's hugely intriguing. Just something you mentioned there. Davy has been noticeably quiet when they play Clare, and maybe that's only natural because he managed Clare to an All-Ireland. There's still a bulk of the group of the players that won All-Ireland 8 years ago, but he has been noticeably quiet. I'd imagine that will change this weekend. Like, if Wexford lose, is this the end? If Wexford lose by a couple of points, is this the end of Davy and Wexford? Like, there's so much on the line between the two of these this weekend. I think their rivalry is more relevant now than it's ever been before.
Yeah, and like I said, it could blow up. And as you're talking there, I'm just thinking of I don't know if people watched Conor McGregor and that horrible ankle break he had last weekend against Dustin Poirier. But a lot of bad stuff had been said there. And you talked about stuff that would never be repeated, and you know what was said between Davy and Lohan. And I was thinking about Poirier, and he was giving out stink about McGregor, talking about, I'm going to murder him, I'm going to kill him, and you don't say that stuff. And then he just finished off his interview. This was the post-match when, McGregor was down at the side of the octagon prone, getting his ankle looked after, and Poirier just finished up, the guy's a dirtbag. I just thought it was such a brilliant quote, because you didn't have to say a whole pile more than that. A couple more comments in. Davy versus Lohan is as gas as ever. I'd say Wexford have the Batons of Clare too. Andrew Sullivan, Clare v Wexford, Clare end of by 4 points. My Emerald 90 touches back on the structure change. My solution is 2 open draw All-Ireland per year. Each team then gets 2 championship matches per year, and there will be one-sided games, but open draw small counties could get to a quarter final. Billy B, rumour has it the Lohans are entering fittest family this year, and they might well win it too,
Oh, Jerry Mac.
Yeah, pure hatchet. Love to see Wexford do a job on them. Big question is around the use of players for Wexford. Madness bringing lads back on in extra time that were out on their feet. Panel depth. Well, I think there is panel depth. There are good players there. And I am rehashing the same point here, but the likes of Harry Keogh, who's been used for years to not come on.
Connor, as well.
Yeah, what are they thinking in training? And maybe one or two of them had a knock, but you're still on the bench, so why pick them on the bench if they weren't ready to go? So the brilliant thing it did for Kilkenny's panel is so many of them coming on the bench scoring 1-8. What has the mood been like in training in Kilkenny for the last couple of weeks? I'd say they're hopping off the sod. Mad for the Leinster final. Everyone thinking, geez, I might get picked here. Whereas with Wexford, they're going into it, and a lot of the panel are thinking, well, I'm out of contention anyway. So does that affect training? In your experience, can that affect the panel?
Yeah, you've been on panels where how frustrating is it when you know the 15 and
I'm not in it.
Yeah, exactly. When you're in it, it's okay. When you know the 15 and you're not in it, and you know that you could score 110 at training, and you're probably still not going to get a look in, that is very, very frustrating. I think the real interesting point in this game, what makes Clare Wexford so interesting this weekend, outside of Davy versus Lohan, is you have 2 sides coming in. It's not like last year. You have 2 sides coming in really good form. Wexford have produced a big championship performance already this year. Fair enough, they didn't get over the line. Maybe should have in normal time. Clare produced a big performance against Waterford, albeit hitting a lot of wides. And nobody knows what would have happened against Tip if Aidan McCarthy hadn't got sin-binned. So I think that's what makes that game. That's a real 50-50 game. Last year we were talking about, Wexford have to bounce back after the Galway game, but we weren't maybe 100% certain, and we were kind of writing off Clare. Whereas now I think the two of them are going in. This could be the game of the weekend. It really, really could. When everything is taken into account. I'll put it this way: when you look at the Munster Final and Leinster Final, there's lots of talking points. Don't get me wrong. But there's nowhere near the subplots of this game. There's so many different things going on in this game.
And there's backdoor in those games. I mean, This is you're done if you're out. There's a couple, I wanted to get into the nitty gritty of the matchups and all this kind of stuff, but a couple of good comments have come in, so I can't help but read them. Donald Farrell, will Davy name TK as a close contact before training? Before throwing, obviously that's very tongue-in-cheek with what happened earlier in the year. Clare have had no luck. A Wexford referee put them here, so they have all the ammunition they need in James Owens. They're a little bit harsh on James Owens. He is generally a very good referee, and all the messing aside, you do have to acknowledge that too. Mark Corcoran, Davy is like a squirrel storing nuts. Lohan, Loughnane, McGarry, and on. And there's so many nuts at this stage that it's getting a bit nutty.
I think, there's no doubt about it. Paul Galvin talked before about his black book. There's no doubt Davy has a black book, and I'd say there's a few pages filled out in that.
Yeah, Mike Sinnott added, Wexford seemed to be back in the groove. Played very well in our last 3 games. With the weather on Saturday, we might need to go direct a good bit. Wexford by 4. Are Wexford in good form overall? I mean, if you go back to last year, the 2 championship games they had were stink. They lost by a combined total of 22 points against Galway and Clare. They did draw against Kilkenny, right? They lost in extra time, but they drew with Kilkenny and played quite well overall. So I think they'll be coming into it in a much better state than they were last year, surely.
I think they will, yeah. The big question is, what's the mental fatigue like of not getting over the line in a game that they feel they should have had? It's probably taken them 18 months to get over the All-Ireland semi-final defeat to Kilkenny or to Tipperary in 19 when they were in a really, really strong position. 15-14, different stages of the Leinster semi-final against Kilkenny. They had 15-14 as well. Didn't get over the line. So history would suggest that it's going to be hard for them to overcome that kind of, I suppose, the mental scars of that defeat. Time will tell, but they are definitely playing. They have been playing well. They have a big championship win against Laois, a Laois team that you would say maybe they were terrible against Wexford, but they franked the form a bit, at least against Antrim, came out and delivered something, and then they delivered a big performance against Kilkenny. So yeah, they definitely are in the groove. We didn't see anything like this throughout the 2020 championship from Wexford, so they definitely are in the groove. And I would say, like, Clare were in the groove against Tipperary at different times as well. And we talked about, like, can't overstate it too much, but the sin bin did have a massive say in the game. But they did lots of really good things in that game, particularly early doors. They didn't miss anything early on, and they finished strong. And I said that before. I think that's crucial. They didn't hang out, throw in the towel and get beaten by 10. They finished strong. So yeah, to me, this is the most intriguing game of the weekend. Nearly.
They finished strong against Tipperary, but they didn't finish strong against Waterford. Waterford were well behind in this game and pulled it back a little bit closer late on. Tony Kelly obviously did the job for a finish, but in the last 10 minutes, well, even go back a little bit further, in the last 15 minutes, including injury time, it was only Tony Kelly that scored from play. Well, the only Tony Kelly that scored at all. And like, even if you're going the last 25 minutes, if you include injury time, just 4 points, whereas it was 10 points for Waterford. So they had a bit of a fade out there. And maybe, like, you'd have to accept too that Waterford played into their hands by having Caleb Lyons in the full back line, marking Tony Kelly. And, you know, maybe for Liam Cahill, he had no choice because of all the injuries he had. So you're against a weakened Waterford team, but you have a big period of fading out of the game. Against Tipperary, you very much faded out while that black card happened. Things went against you. It was a fluke goal. Obviously, you can't blame the 14 outfield players for Eibhear Quilligan letting a soft ball in. I'm not really trying to hammer Quilligan because he made a couple of great saves, but it's not the outfield players' fault that a penalty was given that shouldn't be given. You know, Aidan McCarthy did it, but, you know, very, very harsh. And there's sort of the rule now, apparently the talk is if they're in a position to set up a goal. I mean, this seems to be a new adjustment to that rule. But anyway, you can't really blame a lot of the players for a penalty that shouldn't have been awarded and a fluky goal that shouldn't have gone in. But still, they did kind of fade out in a big way there for a period. And that's 2 games in a row that they've done it. But then Wexford fell apart in extra time, didn't they? So, I mean, there's weaknesses to both teams. Neither are perfect.
Yeah, I think the big question is, Shane, and they've managed to do it. Like, fair enough, Tony Kelly was on Cottle Barrett, and Cottle Barrett kept Tony Kelly somewhat quiet. But they were able to create a mismatch with Ian Galvin and Paddy Maher as a result of Tony Kelly being picked up in the full back line by Cottle Barrett. And it'd be interesting to see if it's a mismatch with Kelly or if it's a mismatch with somebody else. Like, I wonder if Kelly goes into the full forward line for Clare, will Liam Ryan pick him up? And then all of a sudden, will that leave Aaron Shannon on somebody else who we can go to town on for a high ball? Or will
but that happened at the start of the Kilkenny game, that Simon Donoghue had trouble with Owen Cody in the air. We're going to talk about Owen Cody later on. And like, this very point you're making is exactly what I was thinking about. Maybe Matt O'Hanlon goes full back on Aaron Shanahan, and he can do a good job on him because, you know, Matt O'Hanlon's played full back, no problem at all. Liam Ryan has a bit more pace around the field. I still think he'd have a really tough job of it on Tony Kelly, but I can't see them going with the exact same. I can't see them persisting with that matchup when it backfired so badly last year.
Yeah, and it's funny, Joe O'Connor was one of the designated man markers against Galway last year. Now, he's not featuring now at the moment at all. Sean Murphy, obviously we know him as a sweeper. He would have been man marking to some extent, as in maybe he would have followed Bubbles when they played Tip in 2019 and maybe followed a couple of other players. But to actually, you know, man mark a player like Kelly, I can't really see him picking him up as well. So it's a very, very interesting kind of conundrum for them.
Yeah, like Sean Murphy's been very good at man marking. The likes of Bubbles, you said, he's done it on Danny Sutcliffe a couple of times. I remember a few years ago he did it. But that's man marking when you're probably been dragged out the field as a wing back, whereas if you're Tony Kelly, you're going to say, right, Sean, come in here on the square and it'll be you versus me, the two of us in the pit, and see who comes up. And against most players, you're going to give Tony Kelly the advantage there. Like, he's so good in so many ways. I think this is that the game kind of rests on that again, which is mad. But if Shane O'Donnell is also fit, what a boost that would be for Clare. I'm not sure what the situation is after his concussion. Aaron Fitzgerald, it'd be nice to have him in the back line. Paul Flanagan did really, really well against John McGrath last day. Conor Cleary's going okay. He mauled Seamus Callanan throughout that Munster semi-final. Rory Hayes did quite well. Hey, look, you're supposed to maul your man, and you're supposed to get away with it. So he's very good at doing that. And so, I don't know, who do you see winning this game?
I'd probably be favouring Clare ever so slightly, just on the basis that I do think that Kilkenny defeat would have taken a lot out of Wexford. Genuinely think it would have taken a lot out of them. I think there would have been the guts of a week recovering from it physically, let alone mentally. And I think just when you take into account that they were, bringing on the same players as we talked about, I don't like that. I don't like that for even a vibe around the squad. I think Clare, while we've probably written them off maybe pre-championship, they've definitely shown enough already to warrant probably that they can make a bit of a run through the qualifiers. I'd ever so slightly be favouring Clare, but yeah, to me this is a belter of a game. This is one of the games of the weekend, and it's a bit of a disaster in a way how early it is on Saturday. But in many ways, by 4 o'clock on Saturday, we could have had one classic game before we even start going into provincial finals.
I think I tend to agree with you that Clare can get it done here. Even though last year Lee Chin wasn't fit, so that was a huge blow in that game. So he's going to be assuming that he's recovered fully from that last game, the exertions they had. If he's going well, that who in the Clare team marks him? Does he go centre forward and ask John Conlon, well, what you make of this now? I'm going to float off you and I'm going to turn and run at you constantly. That's going to be a huge test to Conlon. Is Conor McDonald going to go in on the square? Is Conor Cleary going to match up with him? The other thing then is Rory O'Connor, someone who we've talked about a nice bit, and I feel is in hurler of the year type form if he can get enough ball. Like, does he go out wing forward on Paddy Fitzpatrick and see how does he like it? Or will David McInerney come into the team? There are a lot of moving parts here. But like you said, that whole vibe thing, the vibe in the Wexford camp after maybe not using the panel and just how dispiriting it was to play really quite well against Kilkenny and lose. Then also the vibe that of not using the subs, and then also a point made here by Diarmuid Kelly. Does the Lohan Fitz feud give the edge to Clare? How into this feud are the Wexford players? Surely it's so close to home with Clare, it means more to Clare players. I think I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
And there's one final point. Clare come into this having won a game against a very, very good Waterford side that were missing lots of players, but they come in knowing that winning feeling a little bit more recently. So I think I'm just about going with them. I think last year's defeat to Clare should really kind of pump up this Wexford team. There's a lot on the line. They've got a lot of players that are at their peak stage, and very, very soon it's going to start going the other way. They actually kind of need to deliver at this point, don't they?
No, I'd agree with you, yeah. I think it's interesting as well that two of Wexford's flattest performances under Davy have been against Clare, that 18 quarter-final and last year's qualifier. Like the previous, you'd say, is definitely in Clare's favour here. You definitely say that they have, they have the nuts and bolts to beat Wexford. But yeah, I think it's going to be a real tight game. But I would be favouring Clare, and I do think that's interesting. If you saw the Clare players, as you did out on the field in O'Moore Park last year, you saw how much it means to them to beat. I don't know, to beat Davy, to beat Wexford, or just the fact that they were written off maybe coming into that game. It definitely does emotionally mean a bit more to them. They should be absolutely no problem triggering the emotions that are needed to get up to championship level for them this weekend. Whereas Wexford will be really trying to force it almost. I think they'll be really trying to create scenarios to get the emotions running high. But I think it'll be a lot more natural for Clare, and they'll be just favouring them, yeah.
And is that also because you're in Clare at the moment?
Yeah. Well, that's possibly too. Down in Torpy country, actually, down in Clare, yeah.
Oh yeah, pick up a few sticks for me there. James S. looking forward to Lohan Fitz cam on Sky. Also, Owen McDonagh is going in 2-footed on me. Give it a rest, Stapleton. You're forever slating Clare. It's getting old at this stage. I think I say a lot positive about Clare, do I?
I think you've just tipped Clare to beat Wexford as well. I don't know, like, if we can't bring up Clare have been beaten by 40 points in a minor match, there's something seriously wrong.
Yeah, and like some of the forward, like I've definitely made a point that I think Ryan Taylor is a very good player, a guy coming through. Ian Galvin had a very good 40 minutes against Tip. David Reedy showed some good form, and if he can do what he did against Kilkenny in the league, soloing up the centre, that might trouble Wexford. Aidan McCarthy, one of those players that if it comes off for him, you could see him scoring 5 points from play. Aaron Shanahan, whatever it is, whether it's just a lack of kind of composure in front of goal or whatever it is, I'd like to see him do the Colin Fennelly thing, which is turn and run straight, try and bump his head off the crossbar and knock the ball in with him. There's a lot of good that can happen with that team. Colin Galvin is kicking onto another, back into his old gear. He's sort of moving that direction. Cathal Malone, very good. So, we say an awful lot of good things about Clare. I think we definitely do at this point. Donald Farrell added in, I think there's an anomaly with teams that bring back on players they took off and have joint captains. You would never see that with Kilkenny. True for Wexford now and Clare before. Tony Smullen, 3 players in Cody's tenure without a shadow of a doubt. Henry carried the team in big games. That penalty against Tip turned the game. Not to mention Dermot Curran giving a free after 15 steps from Richie Power.
That's 2 weeks in a row.
TJ Reid, best forward around, and Mick Fennelly, a beast in midfield. Joe Butler, I'll go for Wexford on the basis of their performance this year. Revenge for Davy, lesson learned from Kilkenny game, and they will do everything to negate the influence of Tony Kelly. Well, that's always a tough thing for any team to do, so we'll see if Wexford can manage it. We'll move on to Laois and Waterford now. Please keep getting your comments in on that. We love to hear it. Laois against Waterford down in Nolan Park. 500 supporters allowed in. Ridiculous.
Asher, it's madness, yeah. Especially in comparison to the amount of supporters that are going to be at other games as well this weekend. It's crazy, really. The big question going into the game, I suppose, is can Laois produce something? They produced a season's best last weekend. Can they produce something this weekend against a Waterford team that have probably been down in the dumps? Now, fair enough, they've had it must be 3 weeks to have turned things around now at this stage. But that was such, that was the flattest performance of Liam Cattle's reign in Waterford. Can Laois seize upon, a couple of maybe frailties that are there, even though they're probably going to have Jamie Barron and Conor Prunty back? It's going to be really, really interesting. I find it hard to see how they will, but especially if they play negatively as well, which they might to some extent, to try and negate that Waterford attack, particularly in the inside line. I think Waterford could do an awful lot of damage from out the pitch. But be interesting if Laois can get off to a good start. They hopped off Clare in the qualifiers last year, only went down a point, I think, in that game, even though it was 14 against 15. So, they have a bit of previous when it comes to actually producing something in the qualifiers in the last 7 or 8 months. So hopefully they can make it really interesting. But I am still pretty strong on Waterford. I still think there's a big kick in them yet this year, even though they're in an absolute shark tank coming through the qualifiers. The way they're going to come through, they're going to have either Clare or Wexford, Cork or Galway in the next round. But I still think there's something big in them. I still think there's a lot to like about their attack, and I think they'll get back in the groove at the weekend. Yeah, well, Laois have plenty in their attack too. Paddy Purcell's performance the last day out, it was on the line for them. They hadn't won a game in 500 days. You can imagine the buzz in that camp, and Cheddar driving them on for the last week or so. Tough to turn around and get the bodies going again and mentally get yourself up for it again. But a lot of their key players, their all-star nominees like Jack Kelly and Enda Rowland, they stepped up. Now, Ross King also played very well, got a couple of points before getting his second yellow card. Willie Dunphy was really good. Chad Dwyer was quite good. He kept hitting wides now, and he eventually got a point. But a lot of those guys played well. PJ Scully started to step up as the game went on. Have you played at Nolan Park before? Oh, loads of times, yeah. To me, the nicest ground to play in Ireland. Yeah, other than Semper Stadium, it's lovely. But it is not. It's a lovely venue, and I've often said that. But it's class. But is it Parnell Park is very short, and Enda Rowland was landing his puckouts on the 14? Do you think Enda Rowland can do that at Nolan Park? It won't be too far off. It's not altogether long or wide. It's a bit bigger than Parnell Park, but it's still quite a bit off probably Thurles, and definitely quite a bit off Croke Park or Páirc Uí Chaoimh. So yeah. I'd say he can. So do you think that plays into the hands of Laois in any way, shape or form? Because they'll want to keep it tight. Then again, that's where Wexford absolutely ripped them apart a few weeks ago, and they stepped off the puckouts. So maybe I'm trying to imagine a factor that will help Laois that isn't actually there. Yeah, with due respect, Shane, I think they thought they could probably do that against Antrim. They probably thought they could take a chance and leave a ball down and long like that and get a lot of bodies in underneath. If they do that against Waterford and Waterford come out with possession, which I think they will a lot, then all of a sudden you have a lot of space to far end. You have a lot of one-on-one matchups to far end. It's almost like, when you see a team pressing in football now and everyone says, press the kick out. Yeah, that's grand until the ball goes long and it breaks against you in midfield, and all of a sudden there's an acre in front of you. So you said they committed 4 a lot of the time into the breaking ball last week. I don't know if they'll be able to commit the same amount of bodies because it's kind of kamikaze tactics in many ways against a team that could hurt you that much. Antrim, with due respect to them, weren't going to hurt them the way a really, really high-end team will. So I'd say we'll see that tactic. I don't think you'll see it as often, though.
Yeah, lots of teams have done this, but like you and I were at, was it Parky Rin to see the Munster Final in 2019, the club final between Burrislee and Ballygunner. Ballygunner, heavy favourites, but Burrislee dumped so many puckouts straight down on top of the sweeper with everyone converging. If we're thinking that Laois can't exactly put everybody up front and kind of try and hit it into the 14 as they did last week, can they maybe hit it to a wing forward and just absolutely load the area with numbers for pretty much every puck out? Because at least you can't be as counter-attacked quite as quickly in those situations normally.
I'd put this to you, though, if they continue, that's very taxing. How long could they do it for? We've talked about conditioning.
It forces Waterford to work hard as well, though.
It does, but who's a better conditioned team?
You
know, I do think Waterford are better conditioned. Obviously, they're a higher end. They played the All-Ireland final last year, and they're probably even a younger profile than them. But they're going to have to. It's just when you try things like that, they're just going to have to come off for you. And even with those long puckouts, not going to try them the whole time down towards the edge of the square, maybe. But when they do come off, they're going to have to get a break or two. Conor Prunty probably won't have hurled in 4 or 5 weeks as well, coming in probably a full back. They probably will have 10 starters from last year's All-Ireland final team, but still they're coming in kind of down in the dumps a small bit. But as I said before, Liam Cattle has turned it around with the minors. The tip minors turned around with the tip 20s or 21s as well. So he has a great record of being able to turn things around and bounce back. So it'll be really interesting. And he basically promised a lot of changes as well. So it'll be interesting to see what new personnel comes in. Maybe Mikey Kiley will start. Be interesting to see that too. But I would be expecting him to follow through on that and to see some fresh faces.
Yeah, actually, as Andrew Sullivan points out, 3,500 was announced this morning for the Waterford versus Laois. So at least that's an improvement.
Right, in fairness.
Laois have nothing to lose, says SSRI. Pep in their step after beating Antrim. Some nice hurlers go 15 on 15. I don't know if they can do that, can they?
I'm not sure. Everything that we've seen this year would suggest that they won't as well, because they've generally played at least a man back. The thing is as well, Shane, this is a real kind of, like, I know you talk about bonus territory, but this is a real bonus for Laois. They have another game before they play Westmeath in that game to see who stays up in Division 1. So I think they'll look to get as much of this out as they possibly can. I'd love if it was tight early on. I'd love if they could make Waterford squirm a small bit. What you don't want to see is, Desi Hutchinson in 40 or 50 yards of space and getting to look his man in the eyeballs. That's exactly what you don't want to see.
Yeah, I wonder where will Austin Gleeson remain in the backs. He was Waterford's best player the last day. Will he stay in the backs? Will we see a bit more from Stephen Bennett? The forwards more or less imploded. The forwards didn't score from play outside of Stephen Bennett, as far as I remember. So, they really do need to get something out of this performance, Waterford, other than just winning. They probably need to get a few performances in there that make them think, okay, we're going into the next round of the qualifiers, which will be a very, very tough task in better form.
Yeah. Like, remember when they played Westmeath in the league, and I know it was a much changed Waterford team. They cannot fall over the line here. They need to get things moving again. They need to put up a big performance. They've generally put massive scores in the league. So, if you're basing it on what we saw in the league, you're looking at Waterford putting up, a 323 or 324, that type of a score. I kind of expect them to do it as well. I think they should put up a good bit of resistance, but just can't really see it being competitive beyond 40, 45 minutes, being honest.
Well, we would expect that to be the case in the Leinster final when Dublin meet Kilkenny at 7:30 Saturday evening at Croke Park. It's interesting that Dublin just haven't beaten Kilkenny in so long. 2013 in the championship and then 2015 in the league. So Kilkenny certainly have the Indian sign over them. Big
time, yeah. If you look at, did you ever wonder, would things have changed much if Liam Blanchfield hadn't got in for that goal and that foul had been called in Parnell Park when Pat Gilroy was manager in 2018, was it? Things could have changed an awful lot. That was Kilkenny coming in after winning the league as well. All of a sudden, you feel like you have the Indian sign over them maybe a bit, but yeah, this team hasn't beaten this Kilkenny team, a Kilkenny team that we have regularly said is not up there with the great Kilkenny teams of the past. So that Dublin team was able to beat Kilkenny in 2013, albeit there's probably mitigating factors. Kilkenny were probably on the slide, maybe. But like, how much of a sign or signal would it be of Dublin as a really, really coming force if they're able to get over Kilkenny at the weekend? It'd be absolutely huge. And the nagging thing in my head, not that it's a nagging thing, just a brilliant performance against Antrim, a brilliant performance against Galway, and it's almost like just because history suggests that they won't beat Kilkenny, that's almost why we think they won't. And maybe the fact that it looks like Owen O'Donnell maybe won't feature unless he does an Alan Wynne Jones or something. I was only thinking about that yesterday. Like, have you ever seen anything like that for powers of recovery? It's a joke. Like, dislocated the shoulder, was it 17 or 18 days ago? All of a sudden I see him run into tackle bags with his bad shoulder at Lions training the other day or whatever. He's absolutely mad. But Owen O'Donnell, I'm sure, was in a cryotherapy chamber and getting every bit of treatment that he could possibly get. But going to be interesting to see like whether he's going to play any part. I'll put it to you this way: him being out already, that just causes so many problems, because you're probably putting him on Kilkenny's best forward if he's fit, and if he's not fit, so many other problems kind of just start to develop as a result of him being out.
Quite simply, getting the matchup wrong last year is what allowed Kilkenny to be so far in charge in that Leinster semi-final. Obviously, they went 16 points ahead. Dublin brought it back level, and then Kilkenny just got over the line towards the end. But not getting the TJ one right, that could kill the team. Now, they had James Madden on him last year, and it was a role that didn't suit James Madden. He's obviously a very good player, had a very good game the last day, even despite having difficult times off the field with his father passing. But getting this matchup right is massive. If Owen O'Donnell does play and he's not right, they'll probably just say, just go on TJ anyway and go for as long as you can. Like, he's physically such an imposing, dominant full back. And no matter where TJ plays, you just put him on and say, stick to him like dirt on a blanket there. And so I'm wondering, if he's not there, who will play? And
quick one for you, but before you go into who that, if Owen O'Donnell is 50-50 and the physio says you might get 40 to 45 minutes out of him, but he could pull his hamstring and be out for the rest of the season, what do you do?
Oh, I think you play him. I think you play him and just say go as long as you can. And like, when you feel like it's either going to go, or obviously, hopefully it doesn't, but it does go at that point. Because, this is, a lot of people would say this is Dublin's one chance for silverware this year.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you. Like, this is huge. This would be season defining. If Owen O'Donnell played 50 minutes and Dublin were able to get over the line, like, that would be their season made. Chances are he'd be out for the rest of the year. It's a dodgy one. I remember I had a bit of a hamstring. It was a bit of a hamstring tear, and we were playing first round of the championship. Physio said to me, you'll get 40 to 45 minutes out of it. Played the first half, felt absolutely great. 5 minutes into the second half, bang, a 2-month job, like an absolute disaster. And it's almost like, I should have went off probably 5 minutes before that, because that's when he said that's how long they get out of it. But you don't be thinking like that. But if they're able to get more than half out of Owen O'Donnell, it means someone else is coming in, and all of a sudden the game is in a pattern already. I'm only just saying this hypothetical. He mightn't be able to tog out at all, but I think it's a very, very interesting conundrum that has probably been put to Matty Kenny this week.
Yeah, and there are no easy answers. I reckon what will happen is, like last week when they weren't sure if James Madden, Michael Verney has dropped off there, but last time out when they weren't sure if James Madden was going to be playing or not, it was Sean Moran who was named in at wing back in his place. Now, Sean dropped back out of the team and Madden came in. But otherwise, I think it's going to be Sean Moran will come in for Owen O'Donnell if O'Donnell isn't fit to start. I think Sean will play wing back or somewhere in the half back line, depending on the matchups. And Dara Gray is the one that I suspect might go into the full back slot and mark TJ Reid, because I think Cian O'Callaghan might be suited to marking, of all players, and nobody's really suited to marking the likes of Owen Cody because he's so good. I think he might go on him, and maybe Paddy Smith on Billy Ryan. I actually have a clip from the Eddie Brennan interview that I did this week. I'll just bring it up now, where he's actually talking about Owen Cody, who's going to be a massive player. So I'll just play that. Oop, and I better press play. Oh, apparently there's no sound coming through in the video there, so okay, there was no audio coming through. Sorry about that, folks. There, yeah. So basically, the point that Eddie was making is that a couple of years ago, in his last county final, Jackie Tyrrell was marking Owen Cody, and he went to hit him a rattle before the start of the game. This is a couple of years ago, and that he bounced straight off him. And then obviously we saw how Owen Cody started out the Leinster semi-final the last day, snapping a couple of balls over. I think it was Simon Donoghue, and it had to be fairly quickly changed. Like, he helps bring back that old school aerial threat that Kilkenny have had. Even though he doesn't from the out, like, he looks like one of the smaller players when you're looking in, but he's obviously very physically in good nick sort of player. And between him and TJ Reid, like, John Donnelly's well able to catch a ball. Adrian Mullen has it in him as well. Walter Walsh came off the bench, snapped the ball. The aerial threat is perhaps coming back for Kilkenny.
It is, and Owen Cody also has that kind of corner forward instinct as well, that kind of knack of when he sees an opening, he'll go for a goal too. I think Owen Cody's an interesting one. I remember seeing Kilkenny against Galway, and I think it was the Leinster under 20 semi-final last year, probably only a couple of weeks before Christmas, and he was after having a decent campaign with Kilkenny seniors before that, and I think he was captain of the Kilkenny 20s, and he was totally kept out of the game, like totally. He barely raised the gallop, and I'd say he probably had a hard look at himself after. And he's come back. He's come back in this year. Definitely looks like he's after filling out even more. He looks so hungry for work the last day as well. Hungry for ball. There was a stage there he won a ball in front of Rory O'Connor, and he was able to get a yard away from Rory O'Connor to get his shot away, even though he was up on his back when he got the ball. Yeah, he offers something a little different to them. I kind of said to you before, like, TJ is going to take an awful lot of focus, so that should leave openings for other guys. Over the last couple of years, there hasn't been too many that have maybe been able to step into the breach there, outside of Mullen maybe in 2019. But Cody did it the last day. If Adrian Mullen is able to step up a bit more, now he worked ferocious hard the last day and got through a mountain of work. But if he's able to, maybe contribute more on the scoreboard, there's just so many more options there. Billy Ryan as well. Billy Ryan has that ability to snap a ball too. Probably a bit inconsistent, but they have lots of guys there that can snap a ball. Donnelly, I believe, had a knock coming into the game the last day. Like, me and you think unbelievably highly of him. I think he's class, and he's a lovely pair of hands as well. He's really, really quick hands, brilliant in the air, able to take a score from anywhere inside 100 yards as well. And then you throw a Walter Walsh who showed something probably in his cameo the last day that we haven't seen in probably a few years. So all of a sudden, they've got a lot of attacking options. Interesting to see whether Richie Hogan will be named in the 26 as well. That's a player we've heard nothing about. I presume he's had a few knocks. I'm assuming he has, but we haven't heard anything to say whether he's fit or unfit. I know he was at the Irish Open. I think it was the day before Kilkenny played the last day, so he obviously wasn't among their plans or anything like that. But he could come back into the equation now with 2 weeks between those two games. So yeah, there's lots of different guys there that can pick up the load from TJ now, maybe.
Yeah, Donald Farrell says John Donnelly is the Owen Larkin of this year. That's high praise indeed. But I'd say the likes of James Bergen is more likely to come in. Alan Murphy's been used regularly, as is Martin Keown. Richie Lahey, of course, has that pace and skill. But James Maher's an interesting one to me. Like, he's such a good mover. He came on against Lee Chin when Chin was causing so much damage the last day. Some St. Lachlan's natives would tell you that his best position is in the half-backs, even though we've seen him probably wing forward and midfield. But he's one of these guys whose running power meant that apparently Villanova in America, they offered him some sort of a scholarship to go over. But like, what a player he can be for Kilkenny, even though he was dropped off the panel last year and back on again, and seems to be proving himself. So, yeah, let's call it. What do you think?
I would stick with Kilkenny, Shane, as I normally do. Been honest with you. I think I'm just not sure if you're looking at like what could really catch Kilkenny at the end of the championship is potentially a bit of class, or coming up against a Limerick side, or maybe a Galway side who have serious attacking firepower. I just don't see that Dublin have the firepower to beat Kilkenny. Maybe a lot of things will click and they'll be able to bang in a few goals. And the counterpoint to that, if Owen O'Donnell is missing, there is nothing sure than TJ hanging in around the square. and probably them maybe even front loading their full forward line, particularly in the opening 20 or 25 minutes, to try and take advantage of that. I think there's a couple of goals in Kilkenny, and I think there's a lot of things rosy for them at the moment. The panel must be really on point at the moment, lads. As you say, it's a great thing going into a game where James Matter could think he's going to start, Wally could think he's going to start, John Donnelly could think he's going to start, Alan Murphy, all these guys that have been, on, off, maybe in the last year or so. There's a lot of guys think they can start. They're coming in form. They've beaten a Wexford side, having overcome adversity with down a man at different stages. I think there is that little nagging thing in my head where I think Dublin could produce another big performance. But I'm gonna go with Kilkenny. Maybe it's just the muscle memory of just knowing what they're going to, what they're going to give, and I just don't think Dublin have the class up front to really, really hurt them.
Yeah, not to mention your blind loyalty to the Cats as well as an Offaly man.
Blind optimism.
Like that forward line of Dublin, I think, does have scores in it. Donald Burke, he needs to have a day of days. Realistically, he does. He's going to need to get 4 or 5 from play, knock over all his frees. Danny Sutcliffe is going to have to play for 70 minutes, how he played for...
Who will go after Danny Sutcliffe? Someone will go after him.
Conor Brown.
Probably Conor Brown, because I think they'll realise that if he's shut down, it just maybe knocks off an awful lot of avenues in the Dublin attack.
Yeah, I think Chris Crummey will spend a lot of time in between the 265s and, trying to get up and down, trying to kill lads as well. And he has to, and I mean that in a good way, and he has to try and win some puck-outs also. Because if Conor Brown goes on Danny Sutcliffe, who's very good in the air, and, people we've talked about a few times that he likes to do this thing of swapping the hurley into his left hand and catching with his right, making it very difficult for players. Like, if Conor Brown goes on him, that means Darragh Corcoran is on... assuming Darragh Corcoran starts again, that he would be on Chris Crummey. And that's a very tough puck-out matchup. Both of those are, I think, for Kilkenny in a lot of ways. Ronan Hayes, I think, will be picked up by Hugh Lawler. I think most people would expect that. I think Tommy Walsh's pace at cornerback means that he might be kind of suited to Keane Boland or Keane O'Sullivan. I think he could do a decent job on either of those in a way, depending on the ball going in. But Paddy Deegan then will be marking one of the others, assuming that the matchups go that way. So then Pádraig Walsh, he's going to have to try and mark Donald Burke, but also sit off him as well and sweep in front of his full backline. I think there's enough in that Dublin attack to think they can put up a decent score. But do they ever put up a 120 or regularly enough? Obviously, they put up a massive score against Antrim, 331. But do we feel that they can score maybe 120, 125 even in this game to get over the line?
Yeah, I'm not so sure. And I know I cut you off earlier. Like, who picks up TJ if O'Donnell doesn't play?
Well, I think it's Dara Gray.
Okay.
And I could be wrong. I think Sean Moran will come in wing back and Dara Gray will go on a man-marking job there. Okay.
Dara Gray offers a lot going forward as well. It'd be interesting to see if they try and put TJ on the back foot there. He's a lovely strike from distance. He's fantasy hurling material every day of the week. And I actually went to change my team. I went to change my team yesterday, and the system was down for a minute. So I'm gonna go back because I've inadvertently got back into the equation again. So I'm definitely going to change my team. But go on.
I can't see anyone, like, I just don't see anyone but Dara Gray taking that matchup. Now, I could be wrong, but it just, to me, it's the one that makes most sense. I think Liam Rush will stay at number 6. If TJ is there, do you see a big deal with Rush move out wing back? We're going to just keep Dara Gray on him no matter what? Because Dara Gray has, I'd say, more legs and versatility than probably any of the players that Dublin have in that backline. Like, he might still end up getting cleaned out. A lot of players get cleaned out by TJ, and there's no shame in that. But of all of the matchups, I think that's probably the most likely one to happen.
Liam Rush going to wing back and maybe Walter coming in on top of him and running at him would be very interesting from a Kilkenny point of view.
Yeah, well, here's the mismatches.
Well, I put it this way, and it's the same with Tony Kelly. If you know that one of the opposition's best defenders is going to pick up your best forward, you try to maybe create, inadvertent like advantages. You try to get other people to advantage. TJ mightn't get the advantage, but Wally maybe might. So it's going to be like John Donnelly wouldn't necessarily. He's not going to hurt Rush for pace. He could hurt him from scoring out the pitch, all right. Whereas if Walter picks up ball on Rush and puts him on the back foot, that'd be really interesting. And I said it's great to see him. It's great to see a Walter Walsh in full flow. As long as he's not playing against your own county, is a joy to see because he's nigh on unstoppable. And when he uses stand up, he offers something different to the table again. So yeah, I just think there's more options. I think probably the Kilkenny bench would probably edge it too. When you have the likes of James Maher to come in, he's a proper athlete. Like he's gotten a couple of crucial points in his career as well. One against Limerick at the end of the 2019 semi-final too. So I just think there's a bit more. I think there's a bit more all round from Kilkenny, but I do expect it to be tight. I think it'll go right down the clutch, but I think Kilkenny by probably 3 to 4, I'd say, in the wind-up.
We'll get on to the Munster final in a minute, but just some of the other games that are on the Saturday. The Joe McDonagh final is on, Kerry against Westmeath. Kerry here for second year in a row, obviously being beaten by Antrim last year. But Westmeath, even though they've had a tough league, didn't have a great Joe McDonagh last year. It's not like they're not used to Joe McDonagh finals. They were in a couple of them in the past.
Yeah, they were beaten in the first two. They were beaten by Carlow and then they were beaten by Laois. They've been beaten, not comprehensively, but they've been kept at arm's length in the two finals that they've been in. This is probably not the strongest Joe McDonagh final. It might have been stronger in recent years. Obviously, Westmeath played Division 1 hurling, didn't pick up a win in Division 1. Obviously, had that good result against Waterford where they ran them close. But they had a right good result against Carlow when it was looking ropey enough going into the last quarter. Won by 5. And another real competitive game against Kildare at last. I think there was a point in it at the end. So you'd probably have to be favouring it because Kerry are not that they're coming in by default, but they played 2 games in the Joe McDonagh and were beaten in one of them, and they're beaten by a Meath side who finished bottom of that group in the Joe McDonagh. Down were obviously the middle team, the team that ended up safe, and Meath had a real disappointing Division 2A campaign. I suppose you can take into account some of the Kerry injuries coming into this game. Brendan O'Leary is going to be missing; he's a broken collarbone. Barry O'Mahony is touch and go with a hamstring injury. Just a couple of quotes here from Fintan O'Connor. He was chatting to Owen Cormacan from the Examiner. He just said, Barry's in trouble with a hamstring. This is Barry O'Mahony, who won an All-Ireland minor football medal with Kerry in 2017. We were hoping last week it might get better as the week went on. And that is why he was on the match day 26 for the Meath game, but it didn't really improve at all. That's only a week ago. That is a really disastrous situation for guys trying to turn around injuries like that. At club level, you can get away with certain types of hamstring injuries for a length of time if you're not exposed to a one-on-one foot race, but that doesn't happen at county level. You don't get away. Yeah. You don't get away with anything. So Fintan O'Connor just said that injury is slower than they thought. And Daniel Collins, the captain, has an injury as well. He has an ankle ligament problems. So they're kind of coming in. It's funny, they were coming in with a good bit of expectation last year, albeit Antrim were the favourites coming into the game. Kerry will have very little expectation coming into this and haven't played nearly as well this year. So maybe they'll be able to deliver a brilliant performance in the final last year to keep as competitive as they did with Antrim. And had Shane Conway been used more effectively and used out the field more as he was, or did he go in? Sorry, he actually went into the inside forward line in the last 10 or 15 minutes of last year's McDonagh final and caused serious damage where he was floating early on.
It was the only time he got into the game.
Yeah. If they it's we say it often. If he can have one of those game of games and really cause the Westmeath defence trouble, Kerry will have a chance. But kind of on known form of what we've seen this year, I just think Westmeath would be a bit more reliable. If you look at their attack, Killian Doyle's been doing really well since he came back on board this year. Niall O'Brien is dangerous. He hasn't maybe been lighting it up from play, but he is a dangerous player. Still have Derek McNicholas, Robbie Greville, Josh Call. They've loads of good players. I just think you probably will be more confident in knowing what you're going to get from Westmeath. And as I said, this year's McDonagh, you need to get up this year. You've got Antrim coming down next year, and you probably have Offaly coming up. So next year's McDonagh is going to be so hard to win. So I think Westmeath, both teams need to grasp the opportunity in front of them. But I think I'd be favouring Westmeath to just get through.
Yeah, just about as well. The intensity of playing at Division 1A this year as well will surely stand to them because Kerry wouldn't have come up against that, but hard to know. Kildare also against Meath in the Joe McDonagh relegation final. Huge game here. Meath were beaten by Down and defeated Kerry last week. But you'd have to suspect that that Kildare would come through this. You
would, yeah. It's funny, it's all about getting kind of a bit of momentum when you actually need it. And Meath have a load of momentum, having their bubble has been burst all year, basically. They've no really positive results this year, apart from beating Wicklow in the league. Now they're coming into the biggest game of their year, full of optimism. But I would still be favouring Kildare. Their 20s were obviously beaten by Offaly the other night, but they were very, very competitive for long stages. Their minors were competitive against Wexford. Their 20s had already beaten Wexford. They'd already beaten Carlow. I think of all the teams that potentially could make a breakthrough over the next 5 years, I think Kildare are the most likely to do so. For them to go back down would be a disaster. It'd be a disaster for David Herity, having gotten up last year. They obviously beat Down in the final. For Down to stay up in McDonagh and last year's Christy Ring winners to go back down would be a nightmare. I think they'll just about have enough. Just about.
And also this weekend, the Christy Ring Cup quarter-final, Roscommon will play Sligo. The winners will play Derry in the semi-final, Offaly Wicklow on the other side. Nicky Rackard quarter-final sees Leitrim take on Armagh, and then the Laurie Maher quarter-final that has Fermanagh against Monaghan. We'll move on now to the Munster Final and Tipperary's meeting with Limerick. Limerick are looking for a first 3 in a row since 1989 when it was done by the Premier and the Premier. Tom Smullen.
How have we gotten an hour and 10 minutes into the show without talking about Tipperary properly? It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, Tom Smullen gets us off with a rolling start. Tip will be wiped out in the Munster Final, in my opinion. They got very lucky against Clare, not just with the sending off, but Callan goal was very lucky, which most Tipperary people would accept was a little bit fortuitous. Kevin O'Sullivan, are Tip going to get clipped?
Let's put it out there, Shane. Like, you're not exactly barreling me over with optimism coming into this weekend.
I'm worried. There's no doubt about it. I am worried. Like, Limerick haven't blown teams away this year. They haven't looked unbelievable. There's a lot of talk about their high tackling, which is definitely an issue. Like, several Cork players were either like the hurley around the neck or the shot to the head, that kind of stuff. There is that issue. There's a lot of focus on Limerick. There's a lot of talk about some of their players playing on the edge. But still, they're an imposing team. And you just look around the field and you ask, where are the mismatches that Tipperary can profit from? And there just aren't that many. Whereas with Tipperary, it's all question marks. Who picks up Galan? Who picks up Peter Casey? Who picks up Seamus Flanagan? And then if those players pick them up, then who picks up the next guy? And eventually you run out of matchups for Tipperary. Last year, Tipperary decided we're going to man-mark Keane Lynch, thinking he'd be midfield, put Alan Flynn on him. He goes centre forward. Then you've got Alan Flynn centre back. And he can do that for his club or play wing back or whatever. But it just really unsettled Tipperary. And Tipperary had a few injuries, and Seamus Kennedy and Barry Heffernan weren't there, and the team just fell apart, really. And it could have been a much heavier scoreline. I don't think Tipperary will quite be put to the sword the way they were last year or the 2019 Munster Final. But definitely, I'm concerned. I am definitely concerned.
The Tip game last year was the first game Kyle Hayes went back wing back to, wasn't it?
Oh,
yeah.
I think so, yeah.
I think he started centre forward against Clare. Do you expect any kind of radical kind of move like that on the Limerick point of view? Like, I'll put it this way. Who will Tip be going after, and what can Kylie do to basically make that a disadvantage for Tipperary?
Well, like, who can Tip get at here? So I don't think Richie English was particularly impressive the last. I don't think he's quite at the level just yet since doing his cruciate. I think if he picks up Seamus Callan, maybe a little bit of joy can be got for Tipperary there. Maybe Sean Finn will go for him. Mike Casey's after hurting his knee, not the cruciate now, but he won't be available for 5 or 6 weeks. John Kiley was saying. But if I just look at that Tip forward line, right? Jake Morris played out in the half forward line the last day, and when he gets the ball in his hand, he can do a lot of damage. He scored 3 points. He did some of those lovely knacky one-handed sort of passes. He looked good, but what about when Diarmaid Burns runs out with the ball, charges out with the ball, Declan Hannon charges out with the ball, Kyle Hayes, even further back, Sean Finn, when Barry Nash come out with the ball? I am worried about that. And, can they get back and tackle Darragh O'Donovan and Keane Lynch and Will O'Donoghue and that? And it's just, unfortunately, I think physically Tipperary don't have the same athletic level. They just don't really. Noel McGrath doesn't look quite himself, taken off midway through the second half the last day. It's not happening at all for John McGrath. He looks short of confidence and short of zip. So does he play full forward again? And you have a similar performance the last day when Paul Flanagan completely won that battle. I mean, this is the problem. You go through the Tipperary team, Paddy Maher at full back, not sure that suits him at this stage of his career. And that's not being critical of him. I think that's just kind of the reality of it. And there are players there with a lot of miles on the clock. So it's like there's one comment here from Kevin O'Sullivan saying, I'm playing the cute whore here. I'm really not. I'm struggling to look at mismatches that are going to benefit Tipperary.
Yeah, the Paddy Matter one is really interesting because I'm thinking back to the 2019 Munster Final and how they managed to get Peter Casey in the corner, basically. What's this? Good man, Mark.
Yeah, commented.
Not quite to that level, Mark. But
read out his comment. Let the people listen to the audio
Mark
podcast.
Corcoran said, "There's nothing that turns on Verney more than a tip man with no confidence." Geez, I don't know about that, but it's I don't know. Yeah, listen, no comment. The 2019 Munster Final is interesting because Tip didn't want James Barry following Peter Casey, and that's what ended up happening. And he brought him on a tour of the park that day, and there was so much space in front of him. I think he ended up at 1-5 today. I think he was man of the match that same day. And I'm just kind of thinking, Tip will not want Paddy Maher filling that same role, but it could well be what actually happens if kind of Limerick are clever about it. Do Tip want who do Tip want Paddy Maher picking up in the full forward line? Because basically the way it's worked in games, they've in some games they created the mismatch or the matchup that they wanted in the full back line for Paddy to pick up. He picked up Pat Horgan against Cork, who, with due respect to Horgan, wasn't going to burn him for pace. He picked up other guys in league games that weren't going to burn him for pace. All of a sudden, Clare put Tony Kelly in the full forward line. Barrett picks him up, and Ian Galvin is picking up is on Paddy Maher, and that's not a good matchup. So Casey would be a disastrous matchup for Tipperary to be on Paddy Maher. Who's a good matchup? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, well, see, this is the thing. If you were to say the full back line, what matchups would make most sense? And just, forget about the half back line for the moment. You'd say Cathal Barrett and Peter Casey. That's what I'd say. Size, profile, they're both nippy, fast and whatever. And maybe for Tip, you can kind of cancel Casey out. I'd say Barry Heffernan on Seamus Flanagan, just in terms of size profile. I'd like to use Heffernan further out the field, if I'm being honest. But size profile, and he's probably going to be in the full back line, so you might as well go with it. And I think what we saw in the 2019 Munster Final, Brendan Maher did pretty well on Aaron Gillane, considering the amount of pressure that the team were under. Gillane got some joy, but I think Brendan did very, very well. Now, maybe he's a couple of years older now and you're in your 30s, maybe that's a little bit more difficult. But if I was to just go with the full back line, based on what's available, maybe that, or maybe give Ronan Maher a go again, full back on Aaron Gillane. I know Gillane got joy last year, but Tipperary were just... there was so much ball going in, and Tip's attempts to work the ball out, they just got turned over so many times. Would you deviate from that sort of setup like that? And then where does that put Paddy Maher? Do they want to play him as a sweeper and bring an extra man back? But then again, Seamus Kennedy has kind of been the sweeper.
That's the question, you see. Yeah, you'd basically be playing Paddy in a role that he hasn't played in this year. It's a role he played in regularly throughout the years.
Yeah, and he's a Tip legend here, so I don't want to actually talk him down or anything like that.
He's a 6-time All-Star. He's one of the best players of this generation. That's the way it is. But I'm not sure. He doesn't match up well against Hegarty. Doesn't match up well against Tom Morrissey. He wouldn't match up well against Cian Lynch either. And I'm not sure if he matches up that well against any of the guys in the full back line. But I still think he'll be playing. I'm just not sure where.
Because some of the young lads who've been tried out for Tipperary this year and the last year or so, they're obviously not doing enough in Liam Sheedy and the coach's eyes to be thrown out there. Like Robert Byrne, he'd got a few games in the league, got himself red carded stupidly against Westmeath. He's clearly paying the price since. Brian O'Mara broke his arm against Limerick, so we don't know I don't know if he's available yet, if he's good to go. Paddy Cadell has impressed at times, but obviously not quite enough to be starting the last day. Alan Flynn may come in midfield or maybe even in the back line somewhere for his pace, because he came on and he made a bit of an impact against Clare. After that, Mark Keogh, it just hasn't happened for him. Some people would say play him closer to goal, that putting him wing forward doesn't suit him. Dylan Quirk, he's looked a bit jittery when he come in the last couple of days, but he clearly has quality, but it just hasn't happened for him. So for Liam Sheedy, he's got players there that some of them they're not at their peak years anymore, and then others haven't quite established themselves yet. So this is why it's very hard to not look at Limerick and say they're going to win this. But Brian White, thoughts on Tom Morrissey? Has been very poor in league and championship so far.
I thought he finished the league well against Cork. I thought he was very good against Cork. Quiet enough the last set, but I think he's getting there.
Sheedy doesn't seem to rate Cadell for some reason. Seemed to start underage, but hasn't pushed on. You see, the likes of Ger Brown played. His transfer to Cashel was finalised recently. I think he scored 7 points in a match. I'm not sure who it was against the other day. So Cashel are actually going to be, I'd say, serious favourites for the
Ryan O'Dwyer's back, isn't he?
Yeah, Ryan O'Dwyer's back. Devin Ryan, who played so well for the Tip under-20s against Waterford when he came on the other day. Geez, Cashel King Cormac, get your money in for them as the Sean O'Reen Cup champions, which is the second tier in Tipperary this year. But the players just, they haven't, for whatever reason, they haven't established themselves just yet. And like I've said it before, and I'll say it again, I'd rather Tip lose with some more of the young lads. I wouldn't drop all of the older players or anything, but I'd like to have a few of the younger players in there, because I don't think Tip can win the All-Ireland with all the older players this year. And if they're going to lose it, I'd rather lose it with some of the younger guys. I'd like to see Brian McGrath, for example, get that experience out here. I'd like to see Paddy Cadell get that experience, and maybe better for, they'd be better for it next year.
You don't know, Shane, until they're thrown in there.
But it's all about the puckouts too. I mean, Tip won, I think it was 5 of 29 of their puckouts in the 2019 final. I mean, what are you going to win with that? So they have to have a better tactic for it, or they have to, it comes back to the whole Burris Lee against Ballygunner thing again. Load everyone to one wing, or load everyone on top of Declan Hannon and just plonk the ball straight down on top of his head and say, best of luck with that, and turn it into a war every time, and don't let Limerick simply counter it. But both puckouts, they have to have a plan for.
To be fair, they obviously think there's an issue with puckouts, and that's why they've switched their keeper. I do think Barry Hogan is very flexible with what he can do. You've seen him. He can poke the ball and enter the field, but he can also put the ball through the eye of a needle. And I think that's probably why he's there, for his versatility in deliveries more than anything else. I just think for Tip to win this game, probably the three players that probably have to be really, really, 8 to 9 out of 10, probably Michael Breen, Dan McCormack, and I would say I'd be amazed if Alan Flynn doesn't start. I think he has to start. I just think he brings way too much mobility to the table. Someone had up there Shorty Matter on Flanagan. I don't know. Flanagan's an unbelievable man at creating a one-on-one for himself as well, and always has space. So I don't think so. But I just can't see Tip winning. I can't see Tip winning this game playing the same team that they played against Clare. It's gonna have to be mixed up. They're gonna have. I said earlier on this year that I couldn't see the two McGraths, Shamie Callan, Bubbles, and Jason Ford in the one forward line. Now we basically saw that the last day, maybe with Noel McGrath out the pitch a bit, but you just will not beat Limerick with that. It's okay when you have the ball, but it's when you don't have the ball that they'll hurt you. They will go after some of those guys. Particularly the two McGraths, they will go out. They will try and put them on the back foot and make them defend. And all of a sudden, if they're caught for pace, then there's a 2-on-1 somewhere else, and other guys are going to suffer as a result. So, the team selection is going to be really interesting. Would I be a bit surprised if Sheedy named one team and started another? I wouldn't be a bit surprised.
Yeah, I'm sure you're going to see Seamus Callan playing as one of the men inside. And if John McGrath might end up being the odd man out in this game, and maybe Alan Flynn will come in instead of him, but play out in the midfield, and you might have two men inside, let's say Seamus Callan, and it was John McGrath last day, but maybe Bubbles O'Dwyer will go in there, maybe Bubbles will go centre forward and look to snipe points, maybe even Jake Morris inside. But the point being that Alan Flynn would just be that extra body in around midfield. I think no matter what, Tip will be looking to play two inside, maybe Bubbles sniping from centre forward. Dan McCormack will go midfield, maybe Breen will be back up to wing forward. For Breen, He's had some big days, but generally they haven't come against Limerick since Limerick really established themselves, Galway or Kilkenny. So he needs to really impose himself on a big game against a big team. And I hope, obviously, as a Tipperary person, I hope he can do that. But in the heel of the hunt, even though Limerick have had some difficulties in the league this year, haven't been perfect, at times weren't brilliant against Cork. They just there's too many good players in there. Like there are some areas where Tipperary can get a bit of joy. I think Barry Nash struggled when he was carrying out the balls a few times the last day. As I said, Richie English wasn't perfect. Declan Hannon didn't get into the game for a long time. But unfortunately, just when it comes down to it, at some stage, I think Tipperary are going to tire in this game. They're going to go along with a few puckouts. Diarmuid Burns is going to pluck a few out of the sky. Kyle Hayes will pluck a few out of the sky. They'll go on runs. They'll get a few scores. I just think, unfortunately, for Tipperary, they don't have enough players that can turn and beat their man and put Limerick on the back foot. And over the course of the game, when the other team can do that, it kind of comes home to roost.
Does the league performance hearten you at all? The draw the first day out. It would give me some reason to be optimistic now, to be honest with you, because there was a couple of things they did that night that would definitely show the Tipper evolving tactically a good bit even again, and that they realise they need to do different things. Number one, they let Limerick have the puck out, then engage them around probably between the 45 and the 65, tried to put them under pressure there. Tip had no interest in goals that night as well. Probably for one of the reasons that you said there, maybe they don't feel that they can take on the Tip or the Limerick backline for pace. So they tried to hurt them from out the pitch, which they did. There was also a crazy work rate that night. They were really getting in Limerick faces, you know. And if you look at the last day, 215 of what they scored against Limerick, or against Clare, I should say, in the Munster quarter-final, was from turnovers. I don't envisage anything like that number against Limerick. But if they can get a couple of big turnovers like they did in that league game, they're going to, it is old-fashioned maybe, but they do need to bring a crazy work rate and a massive intensity to the table. They can't let Limerick bully them in the physical stakes. If they do, they're on a hiding to nothing. But there are aspects of that league game that would definitely hearten me if I was from Tip.
Yeah, well, there's no point in Tipperary losing the same old way. They might as well absolutely flood the middle of the field. But even if they do, and it's a war, and you've 10 Limerick bodies against 10 Tipperary bodies, you're probably still going to lean towards Limerick in that situation. But look, there's still a lot of class in that Tipperary team. If we're just going stick men only, I'm still giving Tipperary the edge, and obviously that'll set the comments flying again. But I just can't see Tipperary quite winning this game. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong on this. And I hope maybe one or two players are thrown in that we're not expecting, and they somehow hit the ground running and Tipperary get the win. But I think just about Limerick, maybe by 4 or 5.
Just going back through the last 4 meetings. So Kylie has lost to Tip once in championship, league or championship actually. And that was the dead rubber in 2019, that last round game that they played. But just the scores from 2018, Limerick 123, Tip 214. That dead rubber game was Tip 122, Limerick 21. 2019 Munster Final 226, 214 Limerick. Limerick 323, 217 they met last year. Limerick have put up big scores.
And Tip haven't.
Yeah, and that's the big worry. It's gonna have to be a different type of a game from Tip. Tip will not win a shootout against Limerick. It'll have to be a real arm wrestle, a real struggle around the middle, as you say. It'll have to be, there's going to have to be a lot of hellfire and brimstone from them. And it's not with due respect, it's not something that we generally would associate with Tip. They usually are playing to their strengths, which would be trying to get their hurlers on the ball. They're going to have to. That's why I think there's going to be new personnel needed, particularly around the middle. And maybe Sheedy will have to take a chance or two on guys that he hasn't seen that much of, but guys that can track the Limerick guys, maybe better than some of the more experienced players. And just imagine the situation where Tipper in a game with 20 minutes to go and Bubbles is coming in. Tipper in a game with 20 minutes to go and John McGrath is coming in. And it's a different type of a game, and then it's going to open up a bit. I think that's the way Tipperary win. I think there's going to have to be a few sacrificial lambs for the first hour who are going to have to absolutely work their socks off around the middle and let the finishers come in and finish the game. That's how we would envisage Tip winning the game.
Okay, well, look, get your comments in. Let us know. That's it for us this week.
Hey, quickly, Shane, who's the most important Kilkenny player under Cody's reign? I'll nail my colours to the mast and say that I think TJ Reid is the most important player because he's been by far and away their best player through the rockiest part of Cody's reign. He's spearheaded them to a league in 18. He was central when they beat Limerick in 19. He was central when they won Leinster last year. And invariably, when things have been going wrong, he is the man. He's the one player I think that Cody could not do without now. And even if you look back through all his reign, I think potentially he could have done. I'll put it to you this way. They won the All-Ireland in 06 without JJ when he had a cruise ship done. They won in 2014. Fair enough, Henry was coming to the end of his career, but they won the All-Ireland without him and Tommy. Tommy didn't play any of those latter stages games. Would they win a big game now without TJ? Just can't see it.
Yeah, but they won All Irelands without him before that.
Fair enough.
In the likes of 2009. I know he came on and he scored points off the bench that day, and probably 2008 as well, probably came off the bench. I go with TJ, JJ, and Henry.
And who's the most important?
Jeez.
It would be TJ, Henry, JJ in that order for me.
I'd say Henry, TJ, JJ. And I could probably be moved on that, but it's such a tough one, such a tough one. Right, that's it for the Hurling Show this week. If you want to get the audio podcast, go to patreon.com/ourgame. €5 a month to support the channel and get those audio podcasts. Michael Verney, thanks very much. Enjoy the weekend.
Good man, same to you.
The Hurling Show, brought to you in association with Torpy. Torpy are leading hurling into a new future with Bamboo, a revolutionary hurley created using their unique engineered hurling performance know-how. Already being used by many inter-county players, Torpy's Bamboo is highly sustainable, offers players greater striking distance and a more consistent balance every time, without compromising on natural feel. Check them out on the Torpy website and in the link below, and enter the promo code OurGame to get yourself 10% off.